So if we go back to the early 1800s when the public schools were taking shape, you can look at it a number of ways, but I've identified 5 cultural themes that I think were dominant at that time and go a long way to explaining why the schools work the way they do. Why do we have so much competition and testing and control of children's behavior and rigidity, emphasis on intellectual knowing, certain kinds of intellectual knowing. Why is that? One of the themes goes back a couple hundred years, even before the founding of the schools, and that's the Puritan theological heritage of New England. Certainly not everybody in American culture is a Puritan anymore, and they weren't even in the 1830s. But there's a line of thinking that is consistent through American culture, alongside this democratic, humanistic attitude about human beings. There's another way of thinking that says you cannot trust human nature very much, that we are, pick your favorite word, we are sinful, we are fallen, we are imperfect, we are animal nature, whatever that view is. It's a mistrust of human nature. And when you start from that fundamental mistrust, you have to control people. You have to have those who somehow have been disciplined or trained well enough to overcome their nature, that they now are in a position to take the next generation and to harness them, to moralize them. I'm not going to go into great detail about any of these themes, but if you have more questions about it, we can talk more about it. But in general, I see that theme going in and out of American culture, even when it's not expressed in very religious terms. It's built into the fabric of our thinking about children and about human development, that you have to have an atmosphere of control, of moralism, of discipline, because human nature just cannot be trusted. So that's one theme that I see operating. Another is simply to recognize that this is a capitalist culture. Now, I don't want to get into a big argument about capitalism versus socialism, and am I a Marxist or not? I'm not. But when you look at capitalism, leave aside, yes, there's freedom to own property and follow your individual pursuits, and through your hard work you rise, and all that. That's all true. But also, capitalism is a materialistic philosophy of life. When you have a society that is so thoroughly committed to capitalism, then economic and materialistic values rise to the top. Numbers start to rise to the top. Wealth, possessions. And what happens then is you start to put less emphasis on the inner life, on what you might call the soul, or the personality, the individuality of people, the higher qualities. We want to talk about compassion or love or things like that. We still have them. It's not that they've all been abolished, but in a culture that is so oriented to production and competitiveness and making a profit and satisfying the stockholders and turning nature into commodities, in a culture that's so thoroughly oriented in that direction, you do start to lose the other aspects of human nature. And Horace Mann and his colleagues, when they founded the public school system, were very explicit about that. They were very upfront and said, we support this new industrial system that is arising. The 1830s, 1840s is when the whole factory system was being created. People were coming off the farms to work in factories. And it was recognized very deliberately, we need to educate young people so that they'll go to work in these factories and be good workers, take their part in the capitalist economy. That was a deliberate purpose of public schooling right from the beginning. And we see it all the way through, all the way till today. If you look at any of the major reports and commissions and laws of the past 20 years, A Nation at Risk, America 2000, Goals 2000 and No Child Left Behind. There's an economic basis. It's all through it. Just you read a paragraph or two, and it'll talk about the importance of the economy and productivity, and that's a big part of what it's about. So again, this is not to say that we should just toss that aside and not care at all about what kind of work people are going to do in the world. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that a culture has a certain personality, a certain choice of values, what's really important to us. And in our culture, material and economic values are really important to us. They rise above just about everything else. A third theme that I think has affected schooling in our culture is the rise of scientific thinking, and not just a general scientific approach, which just means experimental and pragmatic, but like an obsession with science. It's often called scientism. It's like making a religion out of science, that the only thing that's real is what can be measured. And this goes along with capitalism, right? It's saying that whatever is material, whatever is physical, whatever you can count and measure, that's real, that's important. But if you want to talk about a child's happiness or a child's sense of purpose or creativity, you can't measure that as easily. And so it's not as important, it's not as real. It's nice if we can have those things, but that's not what an accountable school needs to come up with. They need to show results that are quantitative because of this scientific bias in our culture. And again, I try to find I'll get to this a little later, how holism is a very balanced point of view. I'm not saying throw out science. I'm saying it has become overly dominant in our way of thinking, in our culture. A fourth theme of the culture is what I would call a restrained democratic ideology. So again, we have the Declaration of Independence. We have Jeffersonian ideas of democracy, that every individual should have a voice in society, no matter how wealthy you are or what your background is, what work you do. Every citizen should participate and have an equal say in society. That's a wonderful ideal. But in American history, and you can see it all the way through, Jeffersonian ideals have been stymied, have been compromised by a whole other way of thinking about democracy. In Jefferson's own time, it was Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Party. I won't go through the whole history, but it goes way back. And it's the attitude that we don't really trust democracy all that much, just like we don't trust human nature. You don't want the mob to run things. You want people who are well-educated, who are well-disciplined, who have a moral sense, who have a stake in society, usually meaning that they have wealth, they own things. Those are the people you can trust to run the affairs of society. We don't want too much democracy. We don't like to think about this tradition in America. It violates our basic principles, our basic mythology. But it's a very important part of the whole political and social history of the United States. And I think it shows up in education. And when you look at, even today, Jonathan Kozol's work on the savage inequalities in public schooling, that's a reflection that the communities that have resources, that have well-established families, that have what we call social capital, they get really good schools. Their children have all kinds of opportunities to thrive in this society. The children who come from impoverished communities, immigrant communities, places that aren't established, that aren't as respected in our culture, they don't get such a good education. They don't get the same opportunities, even though public schooling is supposed to be, as Horace Mann said, the great equalizer. Public schools are supposed to be the place where everyone has a fresh start. That's the democratic ideal. But in practice, we know that it doesn't work that way. And finally, the fifth theme that I think gives shape to the schooling that we have is the theme of nationalism. That schooling exists to create loyal, patriotic citizens.